Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I hope everyone who wants to listen to our great discussion, City as a Cultural Space, are here. So take your seats. We have only 1 hour to discuss this big and complex topic. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Anna Trapkova. It happened that not long ago, I was appointed director of the Museum of Moscow. So I'm inspired to speak here in my new role. And today we're going to discuss city as a space of culture. And we're going to discuss how today in cities and mega cities the culture exists, which is no longer limited in traditional institutions, the temples of art, houses of music, but goes into the city environment actively and works in correlation with it. So we have the top speakers today to discuss this topic. Allow me to introduce them. Sergei Perov, first deputy head of the Department of Culture of the City of Moscow. Teresa Mavika, director and co-founder, the VC Foundation. Hedvig Fein, director of the foundation Manifesta. Dmitry Bertman, the film director, director of Helicon Opera Theatre, and Lutz Leis Senring, the night mayor of Berlin. We'll learn more what it means later. So since we're here today in the center of Moscow, in Zaryadye Park, I would like to give the floor to Sergei Perov. Because here, when everything is mixed, high and low, top and simple, city environments and the local environment, how can the local authorities and municipal authorities work with this mixed situation? Hello, my congrats to you, Anna, with a new appointment and career development, Museum of Moscow. For Moscow and for the cultural department is the basic institutions will develop the city as the cultural space, and we'll do it together, hopefully successfully. Distinguished colleagues, dear friends, Moscow is the biggest cultural mega city. This is what all is seen. Yesterday, there was an interesting session when we spoke about being happy, and we came to the conclusion that cultural mega city is a happy mega city. So this is the roadmap of happiness. Let me look here from time to time. This is how it looks like. You can see great figures. No other city, the capital of the world, cannot boast this kind of great cultural institutions for citizens, for Muscovites, and for the guests of Moscow. And on the bottom part, you can see that it takes you 10 minutes to walk until the nearest cultural institution, Moscow. This network needs to be used correctly. So I would like this discussion of today not to be as well the list of presentations, but let us have discussion. If you have questions, if you want to regret or give a remark somewhere, let's do it, and I would participate in it gladly. So this is the cultural agenda of Moscow. Every day we have 270 events a day. Just can you imagine that on different levels for absolutely different participants? So you can choose anything according to your taste. Here we have theaters, cultural centers, and the basis of development of Moscow culture. Moscow area can be compared to the big European city millionaire. So it special importance to the development of Moscow areas. We have a lot of festivals. We go abroad. We have visitors. We have theaters, museums. Mostly they are located in the central part of the city, which is very convenient for the guests. The cultural centers and bibliocenters, parks, which are also active participants in the cultural agenda, are located mostly around Moscow in different areas. In the year 2018, the events of Moscow were visited by more than 800,000 of people. These are the top events. Let me underline it. We have the Nightmare Berlin. Let me highlight that we have our night events. These are traditional events we have every year, and they are beloved by Muscovites. Night in the theater is an annual action. 14,000 people. Biblio night, 70,000 of people. Night in the museum, the night in the cinema, and the night of art. And also, when we celebrate New Year or Christmas, we also have night cultural events. For instance, the annual project of school living party. Every year, all the high school graduates spend their celebration at night in the Gorky Park. So we are eager to develop this area of collaborations. In recent years, we've been starting the nightclub life. Because the mega city of today cannot live just in the daytime. Life is on at night, so we need to realize what it is comprised of and how to improve it, make it even more interesting. Speaking about the culture, going beyond the cultural institutions, first, what we can think of, these are the city festivals. We have lots of them, organized by the Department of Culture of the Moscow city, are really very interesting, especially people who live in the neighborhood, in the area where this particular cultural institution is located. But there is an interesting trend. The regional events become so interesting, and they are prepared by true professionals. So today, the trend is that more and more Muscovites go there from other areas, even if they are not located in the center of Moscow. This kind of events are of top quality, and so as many people as in the city center participate there. This is an example of events we develop. The detailed information is on our websites.
At least in library segment, the smart library named after Akhmatova in Krylatskaya, and I would like to thank VC Foundation, and we implement a number of joint programs, including one on the basis of Akhmatova library. One of them is very, very extraordinary. If we look into the preliminary results, and using this opportunity, I would like to confirm that we are really interested to use all the experience you and our colleagues will get in Akhmatova library, and we work together with a number of different cultural establishments. So we would like to use that experience to accumulate it and use as the basis for next project, which will be deployed all over Moscow. As for urban and district festival, like a street artist, a very extraordinary experience of Moscow. So this is a young project. It's working for a number of years. At first it was called Street Musicians, when everyone could go through shortlisting to get a legitimate location in the streets to share their creative works with everyone interested. And we started to get offers from other artists, including those from other cities, and we reviewed our project, and now it's called Street Artist. So today we offer almost the entire range of all areas of art, and now we have 43 sites in the street, and we got almost 25,000 of proposals during the last contest, and we selected musicians for 17,000 performances in the street. So urban events outside of the cultural area include celebration of the New Year and the Christmas, the City Day, the Young People's Day. So this is those are special events we use to enhance our program at the city level. And finally, I would like to cover some facts on our achievements as related to the topic of our today's discussion. In 2018, city museums and theaters invited 67 million visitors. So Anna gave the first opportunity to speak to me because I would like to shock others. So people who do not live in Moscow would probably ask, where are all these people? But be assured that I checked all facts before our today's session. And these numbers are accurate and true. 7 million people visited concerts. 125 million people visited parks. 14 million people visited museums in the last year. So the most popular exposition project was the exposition of Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera. It lasted for 3 months and 350,000 people visited. So the most popular art museum with 1.3 million visitors. Yes, you will probably like to know that as part of theater year, we will have 92 major theater events in Moscow under the auspices of the theater year, 12 theater festival, and we have a large-scale program for supporting young artists and painters which present their products in the streets of Moscow. We have a major program on how we can work with graffiti artists, and Moscovites know Atrium building close to Kursky railway station, close to the Garden Ring, and you can have a look at how this facility was transformed and how it became the new landmark of Moscow, and this is great. This is what we fully support, and the system of support to modern artists will be announced shortly by the Department of Culture of Moscow. In Moscow parks, we have a new project, Open Rehearsal. So there are rehearsal of theater performances in parks. They are open to everyone who is willing to come. So the entrance is free, and until the 22nd of August, it will be 10 theater teams will have the chance to rehearse openly in Moscow city parks. And we invite you to these events. As part of the Moscow Urban Forum, we have Moscow Urban Fest in Zaryadye Park. nearby. So it will feature concerts, lectures, yoga sessions on the soaring bridge, interactive excursion activities for children as part of Urban Fest, which is also part of the Urban Forum. Also, we have Inspiration Arts Festival in VDNK, so this is a theater festival, and in the theater year, artists will perform plays from different genres, and the specific feature of the festival that every year its program is dedicated to one specific genre, which defines an important topic in the area of arts. Also in VDNK, we have a number of important events as part of 80th anniversary of the park, so follow our announcements. A lot of exciting projects are to come, and we also have a festival of orchestras on the 7th of July with bands from many foreign countries. So this is the summary in terms of statistics, events, Muscovites interested in the events. So this is how the cultural agenda of Moscow looks like. And I only mentioned projects implemented outside of the cultural establishment in Moscow. Thank you. Many thanks, Sergey. Well, actually, what you said is very convincing, and you used number to really prove that today Moscow is one of the cultural capitals of the world. And thanks to city government and due to the fact that we have really innovative institutions like VC Fund, which is now building a huge cultural complex at the Red October compound. But Teresa, you mentioned that you are not building a museum at the moment. So as a new director of the museum, I would like to ask why. Well, I guess that today we will have the chance to answer this question. Good afternoon, and thanks for inviting me. Why isn't it a museum? Well, I wanted you to ask me this question because I would like to open a debate on this topic. Let's begin. So, with your permission, I would say a couple of words. I would like to explain the background. Sorry, I don't have any figures present because I had no site, no platform at place. So our foundation was created 10 years ago in order to research the topics of the modernity and contemporaneity. What's contemporaneity? So it is within the city where people are. I always said, and I will keep saying, that every cultural institution is not a closed space, not something confined within the walls, but it implies people that act, that start cultural processes. And we were founded without a space, and our goal was, no matter how ugly it may sound in Russian, with the goal to infect other people with art in places where art wasn't a property. So we were a nomadic institution with a small manifesto within Moscow, and we offered experimental projects in, for instance, the Museum of the Armed Forces or the Museum of Patterns of Art, which was completely abandoned. And it was interesting for us to enter to places where we were absent, to meet people which normally never worked with that. So what did we call it? We call it the practice of expanding the space intellectually and physically. We wanted to ask ourselves as many questions as possible, because I'm fully convinced that a person which is critical to himself and his life, so he makes his life more conscious. And a happy city is a city where people live a meaningful life. And the city and also the gas space, which we will open next year, it will become part of the city. The culture will have to migrate from the space I mentioned to other locations, to other people, to come back. And we started that exchange. So while I'm talking, you see some slides, and you see the number of our partners till now, and I'm happy to mention that this year we have a project called Expanding the Space that we cooperated with the Department of Culture. And yesterday we had another presentation where I told about the 7 projects we completed for different cultural establishments in Moscow. The culture houses, libraries, cinemas. And Sergei, without mentioning his patronymic, which is Evgenovich, so he said that we were not afraid to contact the Department of Culture and tell them, let's cooperate. And I think no one should be afraid of cooperation. And I think that the essence, the meaning of what we do as a cultural establishment is that we shouldn't confine within ourselves, not to become a museum, a closed temple with an attitude, with a cultural attitude towards culture. And we weren't afraid, and we will get back in future to this point. And I think that the cultural life of the city begins where you have this mechanism of confidence between the cultural establishments and the city government. Otherwise, they will work in parallel. And I think this will not be efficient. So I feel that I'm lagging behind our slides. But, well, actually, we have some premises, some spaces. I told you that we haven't here. We have one in Venice. We work in Venice because Venice is the capital of contemporary art. So Venice hosts a biennale of contemporary art, and we have a project where we exhibit Russian and international artists. So we normally don't ask ourselves what's the ethnicity, the nationality of the artist. And we tried there a number of processes which we will bring to GPP2 next year. So GPP2 used to be like the hydropower plant, so it's based in the very city center on Bolotnaya embankment. Behind Udarnik cinema, behind the Kremlin, and behind the cathedral. When I started to talk about the hydropower plant too, nobody knew where it was. So I told them, this is behind Udarnik cinema. Why? Because no one normally visits power plants. A power plant is a location which exists physically, but it is not apparent on the city map. So it's a place for working, functional processes, but people are not allowed to access a power plant. So when Leonid Michelson decided to buy the area of the hydropower plant. So my goal was how to bring it back to the map of Moscow, how to give it back to the people of Moscow. And for that, I didn't have to build a museum, a location which would be closed from the very start, but we wanted a place which required an effort to enter, but this will be a place which will be continuously open. So this is how it will look like very shortly. It would be a location you will be able to access for free. You need no entrance ticket, and you will be able to enjoy everything going on there. It's like a small city with libraries, restaurants, cafeteria, cinemas, a performance hall, a lot of exposition spaces. It is a city with a lot of spare space. So this spare space is the place for life. And I keep telling my employees that we need to focus on the pause. We are the silence point of time between different activities, and this is an important story for me. And this could be a very long story about hydropower plant 2 and about our work of how we are collecting an archive about the history of the place. So it's all very nice to think that there were warehouses for Smirnov vodka, and now in the place of Smirnov vodka warehouses, young artists will work in their studios. They will be able to produce a new culture. So the life is bursting, and it couldn't be the case of a closed museum, but the space should be open. People are changing, culture is changing, working methods of artists are changing. So starting from the next year, I would like to invite you just to have a stroll inside the hydropower plant. Well, I promise you 100%, I have no doubt that this is the case. This is how it will look like from the next year. I have nothing against museums. They must live, they must develop themselves, but I would like to emphasize the activity we will begin. For other people, would not to think that our foundation worked on the territory with people, but now we will close down and we will escape and confine. So when we began the renovation, so this is the building in Bolotny Island. Yes, so the first thing I ordered was to put a banner. We are not an island. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I think it's really significant for cultural institutions to stop calling themselves museums, because those which will still be museums, they are still trying to transform. But I would like to transfer to another kind of arts, which is even more conservative than museum, and this is opera. So in your art, this difference between high and lower genres, there is opera, there is street genres like carnivals. So can there be anything in common? Well, thank you so much. Opera is the most modern kind of arts today. Why is it really like this? Because it is the only theatric kind of art, including all kinds of arts. It's a synthesis, and this is in demand today. There is music, orchestra, and also singing, choreography, scenographic issues, and so also items of circus, cinema, architecture. Everything is there, and that is why opera is in demand here. And Anna Netrebko, the opera singer, is famous everywhere. And even shampoos reflect her portraits because she's fashionable. Opera is fashionable. Otherwise, people will not buy this kind of product. So this is a fashionable kind of art today. And this is certainly linked with the city. Because Moscow, where I'm honored to live and to be born and to work, is a historic place. I also stage a lot of operas abroad, but Moscow is incomparable. 82 national theaters we have here is huge, and all of them are national, supported by the state. Not long ago, I met a Minister of Culture of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany, and she told me that there are 84 state national opera theaters in Germany, which is 20% of the whole amount of opera theaters of the world. So I would like to thank Germany for employing all of us, directors, singers. Germany is a progressive country, but Moscow is also very active. We have several opera theaters, and they are full every night. They're all different, but there is one special thing. The theater is going beyond the theater. Like you in museum, we want to open everything and to attract to our theater area as many fans as possible to come and see our performance. So any city is made by the temples and by theaters and by museums. Because why do we come to Paris? To go along theaters, streets and museums. Well, good shopping is a good advantage, but it is not everything. And Moscow has great resources for there. Sergei Perov has shared figures with us, but there's so many offers, so many tourists who come to Moscow. Opera is an international kind of art. Many my international friends come to see Moscow for Saturday, Sunday, to go just around Moscow. Some of them have bought apartments in Moscow. Moscow is a great decoration for performance, as it is. So we create a lot of projects, not to say about flash mobs. We have a video next to Hot Theater. We created it. So this is what happens, how opera becomes popular. People are going along boulevard. There is a musician here. And what happens? This is a musician from our orchestra. People are just going along. They think that there is a street musician, and everything will finish as this. When this man will ask for some money, and it is not like this. And this kind of flash mobs are successful. Moscow, believe me, is the city of Stanislavski, Mikhail Chekhov, Vakhtangov, the great theater people who changed the world, not only in Russia but everywhere. Mikhail Chekhov started Hollywood, and the Hollywood school is Mikhail Chekhov. Moscow means Tchaikovsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, Shostakovich, Prokofiev, and other greatest composers. People come to Moscow to learn how to do it and to get the spirit and just to vanish it. We perform operas on open air, and we do it in different historic places, near temples, in the parks. When these historic events took place, we made several performances, opera performances in the Kolomensk Park next to the temple, which is a UNESCO memorial, and we gave the Tsar's bride. And that was the moment when the sun went went behind the clouds. And that happened just the moment when she was dying. And I remember one more thing, when there was the coronation of Boris Godunov, the Tsar, and there were real bells, and all of a sudden there were crows, which hid all the light. Can you imagine that? 15,000 people can join us. So this is the greatest coverage. And these are people who go to some other theaters. So I think it's great that we discuss all this today. You know, this process is develops. The whole boulevard is starting to sing with the musicians. So today, a holiday is something really important for our lives. So we need to have more of them and to do our best that this kind of culture exists. This is how I've described what we have today, but we have great plans. One of them, is it okay if I voice it, Sergey? We have a plan to make some performance in museums, because we have great historic museums with history. There is music museums. We have a plan to make a great international festival. Tsaritsina is another great place. There is a park over the palace of Catherine, the Queen. We plan to make an opera festival, the Russian opera festival. Many international stars like to sing Russian operas. Placido Domingo is the great lover of the Russian opera. He used to sing Lensky from Yevgeny Onegin, Tchaikovsky. He's preparing a new character today, but I will not reveal who he's going to sing. So our plan is to invite the international stars so that they know that every year there is this festival. The weather helps us. It's no problem. When the orchestra plays, rain turns into a rainbow and the sun starts to be shining. So I hope we'll go on working in the Tsaritsina Park. Zaryadye Park is also the friend of our theater. So we've launched a lot of events here, indoors and outdoors. And I think the more the theater goes into different spheres, the better it is. One more thing, and there are some other miracles. Theater can work in cities. Art therapy is another project of our theater and has something to do with our city. It doesn't need PR because it's not ethical. We work with the Kids Narcological Hospital of Moscow. So we've done some unique things. So some kids stuck to severe narcotic drugs. Of 8 people, 78 who are no longer severe narcotic drugs dependent. And this is a great deal. There were some doctors who started to be opposed to this project, but they are really surprised with the results. Music can work miracles. Guys change their nature. They don't have dependence on drugs. They become music dependent. So the theater does not only go from the building to the outside, but to some other spheres. So theater is a miracle in itself. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for having raised this topic. Thank you so much for this great stories. I can imagine the sunset in Moscow, and I would like to give the floor to great guest who for 20 years works with different environments, different contexts. thanks to the fact that Ms. Fein is in charge of the European Foundation Manifesta. So my question is, what changes can you see in different cities after Manifest has started working there? And can we imagine Manifest will ever come to Moscow?
Let's put it on. Thank you for inviting me to Moscow. I personally have a special relationship to Russia, but also Manifesta in itself. Maybe you know that Manifesta had an edition in Russia, Manifesta 10, in St. Petersburg in the Hermitage with 1.2 million visitors, just to stay in the figures part. And Manifesta was one of the founders of Manifesta was a Russian curator, Victor Misiano. We have a wonderful board member even in this panel, Teresa Mavica. And we have for the first time a Russian curator in Manifesta 13 in Marseille. So for us, Russia and the Russian culture scene is very important. What is Manifesta different than actually the 144 biennials in the world? Because there are actually 144 biennials. I think Manifesta is different because we are nomadic. We move from place to place. Maybe as you heard, like the European Cultural Capital. And every 2 years there's a city in Europe which like to host Manifesta. And we act a little bit like the Olympic Games. We invite cities to make a bid, and the most interesting bit of the city, we think, is representing how society is changing through the lens of the city we are selecting. And as maybe many of you have heard, we were last half a year ago, we closed in Palermo, capital of Sicily, where the famous Leo Luca Orlando, he was in the room next door, who was fighting the mafia for 25 years and turning his city from the city of mafia into the city of culture, asked Manifesta 6 years before 2018 what art can do. It's there. Is a biennial able to act as an urban incubator, as a transformator? And I said, my God, we're not like specialists in mafia. We're not the United Nations. We're not an NGO. We're not the secret police. But what we can try to find out is helping the city, the people of Palermo, who have been occupied by a criminal force called the mafia in Sicily, to claim back their own city with maybe urban transformation processes. And this is maybe connecting to the very valuable Moscow urban platform here. Because actually, Leo Luca Orlando asked Manifesta, how can you deliver instruments to claim back the city for the citizens? So you hear already, Manifesta is not l'art pour l'art. It's not putting a painting on the wall. It's actually a very straightforward brief from a city government or sometimes from museums, opera houses or institutions who want to use or misuse us for something which they want to achieve. Maybe interesting to verify, what did Dr. Petrovsky ask in 2012 when he invited Manifesta to the Hermitage, he said, I am celebrating my 250th birthday, and I invited Manifesta as the birthday present, which I like, because I want to be the birthday present for the Hermitage. But this is joking. What he asked us, and this is important, he said, I need an external voice, an external power, to change the education and mediation policy in the Hermitage. And I want you to come here and not only change the perception of what art can do, specifically commissioned art can do, but also how can we learn citizens in St. Petersburg to look at contemporary culture in a different way, to be allowed to ask questions, to be allowed sometimes to ask stupid questions. And he said after closing Manifesta 10, which was in a quite interesting year, 2014, which we sometimes call the, let's say, annus horribilis in some ways, but it was a very interesting year because he said, Petrovsky said, Manifesta changed for the next 10 years the way our staff looked at contemporary culture, but also how we are going to deal with the future audiences. And that was really a compliment because that meant that somehow his birthday present was filled in well. Can we have the next slide, please? This is where Manifesta went. Manifesta is in 25 years the third biennial, most influential biennial in the world after Documenta, which is always in Kassel, Germany, very close to Berlin, and next to Venice Biennale, which is always in Venice, the grandmother, the grand lady Venice. Teresa was talking about it. And these were our cities. We are now in Marseille, we're coming from Palermo, and we're going to Pristina. Pristina, Kosovo, the youngest sovereign country in Europe. In Marseille, what did the mayor? You can check the Netflix series, Marseille, where Gérard Depardieu plays the mayor, Monsieur Goudin, who's commissioning. And Marseille is existing of 111 different little villages. And 70% of these villages don't have access to the sea, which is quite extraordinary if you live in the Côte d'Azur, the south of France and the Mediterranean. So one of the questions was, how can money...
Необычно, да, что 111 маленьких деревень на Кот-д'Азюр не имеют выхода к морю. И выход к морю для этих районов был не только экономический, но моральный и философский вопрос, поскольку выход к морю, доступ к морю – это доступ к Северной Африке, колониальной истории Марселя. Марсель – это порт, это также порт, через который переселились больше 1 миллиона выходцев из Алжира. И меня попросили приехать в Палермо, чтобы рассказать о том, что есть вопросы, на которые нельзя ответить. Я пригласила Рема Корекса из Дании, современного художника, чтобы он помог создать новый вид Палермо на основе переплетения истории, устной истории и данных, и провести исследования людей не сверху вниз, а снизу вверх. И мы создали атлас Палермо. Давайте посмотрим следующий слайд. Это открытие, церемония. И отсюда мы можем посмотреть на атлас, на генплан Палермо. И мы пришли к вопросу планетарный сад. Как мы можем работать над сосуществованием? То есть на Сицилии уже 2000 существовали христиане, мусульмане, иудеи, выходцы из Магриба. То есть и идея в том, что мы видим планету как сад, общий сад, где мы должны жить вместе. Это такая красивая метафора, каким образом в Сицилии и в любом городе, включая Палермо, люди могут жить вместе. И следующий слайд. Городу нужна инклюзивная модель сотрудничества. Именно поэтому биеннале называется культивация, сосуществование. Мы не можем считаться монолитным обществом. В каждом обществе существует разнообразие.
So the idea of a planetary garden to be used as a model for all the Biennale projects was one of the first things we came up to. And what is interesting, because you're asked for the impact, because many people, maybe the next slide is part of this, many people ask, okay, very interesting idealistic ideas, a nice ideology, but what does it mean for the city? And I can give you some examples, because more than 20,000 people participated in our, let's say, bottom-up democratic groups which wanted to decide about the future of Palermo. We refurbished very concretely 2 theaters and a church, but we also created a parcours of 20 venues in the city, which we wanted the city administration after Manifesta to, let's say, refurbish, remodel on basis of a master plan. And Leo Luca Orlando can tell you more about what this is going to be afterwards. But one of the most powerful things I could imagine happened in Palermo was the awareness of the people that they could change their city themselves. And we call it like empowerment. They felt that after the experience with Manifesta, they can continue working together in restoring their city. And I think this is an immaterial legacy, the energy which came free, which created a very, let's say, prosperous situation, also because the cliché image of city of mafia has now been shut off. And of course it takes another, let's say, 10 years to really create a city of culture, seen the complex situation, but I think we succeeded there. We're not saying this to ourselves, because in Manifesta we always invite the university, and this time it was the University of Torino, to analyze if Manifesta really did what she promised to do. And if you go to our website, you can see the public survey, which was not only saying and analyzing and interviewing people, how do you foresee the future of your own city, but especially also what sort of, let's say, social responsibility people thought they could take themselves to change their own city. And one element which is always important, I think, for every city administration, how much was the economic return on investment, let's say by the tourists and the people who came to Manifesta, in comparison with the investment of the city. And this was 3 times. So 3 times the investment of the city came back through what all the tourists spent. Maybe next slide. This is one of the theaters which we refurbished in Manifesta. It's now a community space, and it will stay as a community space. Next slide. One of the main essences in Manifesta is co-creation. So it's not we flying in artists and they just do whatever they want. Most of our works are site-specific, newly commissioned. So we commissioned more than 50, let's say, performances. We did an opera together with the immigrants a group of immigrants in Palermo. But co-creation means that all the 50 artists who worked and came to work in Palermo collaborated together with local associations and local groups, local schools and local university. This is an African artist, Jelilia Tiku, who took the Santa Rosalia Christian procession and transformed it in an African music event. Next slide. This is a Sicilian group, and this is part of what Manifesta tries to map also in the city. We found an archive which has been closed for the public for 400 years. It's an historico archivio. And a local group created a new work. You see an amazing large video, which is a puppet made by local woodcutters. And it represents a famous cineast, Visconti, who was warned, and a letter was found in the historical archive, because the mafia warned him that if he continued with certain provocative political actions, that he would be beaten up by the mafia. And it was a kind of representation of the historical perspective of what a criminal organization can do to a city. Adrian Searle of The Guardian, English newspaper, called this one of the best works he've ever seen in his life, because it was, let's say, you felt the tension in the room together with the video of this puppet who was manipulated by an outside force, and the real beautiful letter of a testimony of what the mafia could do. Next slide. There was a lot of collaboration and proofs of coexistence in the city itself. This is a social parade which was created by Italian artist Marinella Senatore, and it was sort of let's show a little bit of hope. There's so much polarization in Europe at this moment. Why don't we create examples of hope, how people can really live together? Because whatever people say about Sicily, this coexistence of many different cultures is still very much proved. Next slide. Most of the youngsters, let's say, we wanted to reach out to 100,000 students and children in Palermo, the larger Palermo, but most of the schools didn't have buses. So this is an example of how, if children couldn't come to Manifesta, Manifesta comes to the children. And this was one of the buses which was created there to teach children in the schools about their history. About the history of the mafia, but also what can you do in your own personal environment to create an empowerment and to change your environment. And this was quite a successful project because in the end 28,000 children were reached by these school buses. Next slide. This is the theater, which is now a working space by the community. Next. This is a lost part of the city, which we create a permanent garden. So you see, it's not only about contemporary culture and contemporary art, but also really about ecological, environmental, and let's say social projects. Next, I think this is the final next. These are much more figures, but we can go through. Next one. This is another for Marseille. We also create an urban study going deeply into what Marseille in the future can do. And next slide, that's my final. It's called Le Grand Puzzle. How can we in the future in France, which is facing a very interesting situation, social situation, how can Manifesta help to solve this Grand Puzzle? So I hope you will come 6th of June next year to Marseille. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Ну, это на самом деле неожиданно.
Many thanks. So this is an unexpected situation when art can penetrate people's souls so much that it can fight the memory of mafia. Now it's high time to switch to nightlife. And I think that nightlife is today an integral part of the cultural code of Berlin, and we even have social opposition. And Lutz Lysenring can tell us about what's the night mayor of Berlin. What are his functions?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think it's an honor to be on this panel with so much established culture and very in a very developed environment. And what I'm representing is the informal culture, which is probably as big as what we heard before, but it's in the underground and it's not as presented and maybe also not as embraced as the so-called high culture. Berlin has, as you know, the history of Berlin, and after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was a lot of space between East and West, and nobody really knew what to do with that because it was the former death strip. A wall was going through the whole city, and the first people who took over was this informal scene. They took over space, they created, they started clubs, they performed, they rehearsed, they used the space for their matter. And this is what shaped Berlin in the last 30 years, pretty much to what it is. And the newspaper, The Guardian, once wrote about Berlin of the city of the unfinished. And I think when you think about this word unfinished, it is very attractive for artistic and creative people because they can still design, they can still do something, and when everything is clean and tidy and done, it's hard. It's harder, and I have this one example. A smaller city in southern Germany came to me and asked, we want to develop this one area where it's an old slaughterhouse, and they want to turn it into a creative industry area where creatives can work and stuff. And I looked at this area and I saw, and then these buildings were beautiful. They were like old brick houses, run down but still functional. They had a roof, and when I talked to local people from the music scene and the art scene, they said, we're using this already for our work. We do little dinners there with like top-notch cooks from the region. We have performing stuff there, and what happened was the city developed this this whole area, and it turned out that a lot of this informal culture distinguished because they, you know, after finishing and after making something nice and tidy, that was not the space people felt attractive to do anything. So what I'm pledging for is to also think about how can you also embrace the uninformal, and that's what we do in Berlin with the Club Commission. It's an organization. We represent more than 300 promoters and club owners, but also more than 500 promoters who do this in their free time, for fun, for being part of public culture, urban culture, street artists, musicians, promoters, and musicians, and if you imagine the whole cultures which have such an impact worldwide, like hip hop, electronic music, even jazz. They didn't start in a nice made stage for them. They started somewhere in a basement, somewhere in a hidden space, and they developed a culture which is now having so much influence on the lives of many young and older people. And yeah, so my work in the Club Commission is how can we bridge the gap between decision makers who are building infrastructure, who are developing funding systems, who are creating rules and regulations. How can we bring this aligned with the needs of people who are doing cultural work in an informal way? And we are quite successful. We just received 1 million euro from the city to do soundproofing, because clubs have always a problem with neighbors' complaints, and so the city is now stepping in with money to really do soundproofing, different entrance situations, so we can really support small grassroots music venues, that they are not pushed out of their spot. We even approached the local government of Berlin because there are illegal pop-up raves happening in parks. Young people just go there with the sound system and starting to dance, and the city didn't know what happening. This is a Facebook party. Everybody was like quite excited, and of course they sent the police and they had to shut down. And we said, why? They're happy young people using public space, celebrating, as long as they're not disturbing anybody, as long as there is no noise and littering. Just give them also public space. You just have to bring them into dialogue, and that's what we're doing right now. We have this project called Free Open Air, and we try to develop areas where you can say you can do this here when you follow certain rules, and you can even get some electricity if you need it. So we are trying to bring this informal life more into formal ways, and we also happy that operas and also theaters also reaching out to the underground, to the clubs, to the promoters, because they also like to use space to have this collaboration, because it's also inspiring. And I see when I'm here. I was in Kazan a couple of times. I was in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and I see that there is a lot of these informal scenes. And I really hope that these kind of events and forums also used to bring this kind of culture into the dialogue. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Конечно, час.
Many thanks. Well, of course, 1 hour is not enough. 1 hour is not enough to have a discussion for a city as a platform for the culture. So Sergei Perov apologized because he had to go back to work. But as we are happy people, we are the last people in this hall. So I would like our audience to ask 1 or 2 questions to our panelists, please. Do you have any questions? Well, I guess it's everything is clear. Yes, please. Yeah. Then I have a question to all of our panelists. Well, you presented a very optimistic and vivid image of how culture, city, and residents can exist together, can coexist. But can you, just in 1 or 2 sentences, formulate how, in other situations, the picture is not that vivid, and in Russia, in Russian regions, there is like a vision of culture as regarding subsidies. So cities spend money on culture, but such activities never pay back. So why do you think that culture matters today for urban development? Why is it important? I don't really remember the name, but we had a speaker yesterday on one of the sessions who said that for every euro invested in culture, the government, the public budget gets 3 euros. So if you believe culture is expensive, you should think of what would be the cost if we would have no culture. Let's think that every city of the future will be qualified and seen based on what's going on in the city. What we will, the culture will define what we will have in the future. And today we understand that this limit between our free time, time we spend on culture, so this limit is vanishing, is getting blurred, and we have more and more demand for high-quality culture. So that's why I believe that every city of the future will be good only in case it has a lot of high-level culture. So this relation between based on confidence that the city would contact professionals to produce the culture, it's very important in my opinion. Yeah, so I represent culture connected to the highest public spending, because opera, 1 opera theater is equal to 10 drama theaters in terms of cost, because like the musical instruments and the choir requires money, and we have a lot of people working behind the scenes. So we are not profitable at all, but we can give more to the people. If you remember Fyodor Shalapin, who also lived in Moscow, when he would talk about singing, about chanting, he said that there are 2 types of singing, like a moan and roaring. So the moan is the correct type of singing because it has the erotic element. Because all people moan, they will all come to the opera house, because this is the place where you can listen to the moan, and then you can try to moan yourself. And if people would stop moaning, they would stop being people, stop being human, because it's sensitive and erotic component. So in terms of finance, if you would convert the use of the opera, it would be translated into spending, and we have to spend a lot.
The critical element of cities of the future, because I think that the current generation of the so-called millennials, the young people who are now engineers, IT specialists, the digital natives, they speak different languages, they can travel all over the world, and they can work remotely from everywhere. You can be a computer programmer on Bali if you want to. So I think what's really the difference between the big cities, who are also competitors between the smart heads of the future, is how do you nurture your culture and how you make your city unique and culturally vibrant. I think that is the most important factor, next to how much you pay the people, and if you offer them also a place to live, which is affordable. But number three for me is culture and the environment. And so the more you nurture your local culture, the more you engage, and the more you provide space, affordable and accessible space, also for young artists, then you will also attract the young specialists and the future workforce.
I would agree absolutely with Lutz, because I think the future of the city, and we're facing this in many cities in France already, the future of the city is an environmental and ecological neutral city, and if we don't start working on this right now, we're not going to make it, and probably everybody from Western Europe will flee to Russia, because at this moment the cities in France are facing temperatures, and in Spain temperatures of 40 to 50 degrees. So if we're not using innovators, artists, thinkers, philosophers to rethink how we are going to live, and to rethink how we create informal, ecological neutral spaces, how we organize our mobilization, our navigations in the city, our work, is there work for the future, all these issues, and you need creative thinkers to solve these issues and to break through the boundaries. We're just not going to make it. And I think you asked me what would be the Manifesta project for Moscow if we would be invited. Then I would like to do a rooftop festival. I would like to invite then every citizen in the city of Moscow to come up with a proposal how to make his roof green, and how to create a new water system. Because if we don't make the cities more green, we're going to be burned. Happily here, it's quite cold with your 18 degrees, but coming from Marseille, where it was 47 last week, you might not want a whole of France coming into this direction in 2 years.
Есть вопрос? Давайте.
You have a question. Great. Thank you so much. No question so far? Unfortunately. Oh, one more question. My name is Dasha, and I'm representative of the regional culture. I launch events in social spaces of the city of Kazan. Could you please give me a piece of advice? I'm a millennial, the young who wants to change the cultural system and to change the formats for the new ones. But there is a traditional conservative city structure and the system. Unfortunately, Sergei is no longer with us, so they have 30 concerts, 50 similar performance and some master classes, and this is quite a conservative approach. How can we change it, referring bring the information to the authorities, to those who give allocations. This is what we face because we work for the city funding. We launch events for the city. But the problem is we, or probably me, we cannot just refer this idea about the new creative projects to the state authorities. May I answer this question? I will start with the most conservative thing. How it should be changed? Our theater, Helicon Opera. Have you gone to my theater? This is a fashionable theater, and mostly there are young people like you. And Tatiana and Evgeny Onegin will be the age of real Tatiana. But you know, when I started this theater, I was a student of Gitiev University, and there were 5 of us. We were awful students, and we were not invited to any other kind of theater. And we decided to launch, a theater of our own. So we took Stravinsky. That was the only opera for 2 solo singers. So I remember the first performance when my mom joined us, then my dad, and all of a sudden there was the 4th performance. Sviatoslav Richter, the great pianist, was the only person who listened to us. And I started doing how I should start. There are a lot of theaters which are historic with traditions, but if you love what you do, just do it. If you expect that somebody would give something to you, they will tell you, well, we have the budget for this and that, and this is important for the young culture. Well, you're a lady, and probably it's bad if you spend your life for that, but just invest your own capital and human capital into it. Don't change anything, just add. When you change something, you can kill something which is important. Probably we do not understand this used to be important, but tomorrow when we realize it, it will be too late. So with respect to something which exists currently, to make something new, so that the people who come to my event will come to your event. Daria, thank you so much for this question. Urban Forum is the forum about the top best practices. And it's good that we can see the context of cultural development in the country is different. And we need to prove that culture can and should be different. Clearly, there is no high or low style. We are living in the space of culture which is equal. Look at the website Urban Forum and refer this video to the people, officials from the city authorities, to your mayor probably, and attract the attention to them, to what has happened in Russia, really, thanks to collaboration of city authorities and private institutions. The urban context has changed. Kazan is a great city too, and clearly the same kind of changes will start in your city. And you wanted to add something?
Kazan is the first city in Russia which has a night mayor, and his name is Artur, and he's a very nice guy. I will visit him in August, and I can only suggest that you support his work. And bring more dialogue in the city, from tourism to creative industries to culture, and I think Kazan is one of the most progressive cities in Russia, as I know. Tatarians are forward-thinking people. So I think you will have open minds there, and I also see in Kazan that there's a lot of in the old town of Kazan. There's a lot of space which is developed as theaters, as performing space, rehearsal space. So I think there is a lot, and probably it would just help to bring everybody together and bring more more attention to what's already there.
Be persistent. Earlier or later, they get tired of somebody insisting on something. I can see that all of you want to go on our discussion, but we can do it in the personal format. We have to leave the room. I think this is an endless discussion. There is only the start, and I hope that we'll have more opportunity of discussing this